Hi, this is Steve, and I wanted to give you just a little bit of help on how to set up an Excel solver problem to solve linear equations. First of all, to be sure that you have solver turned on, what you want to do on this is click on File, and I'm in Excel, come down here to Options, and from your Excel options, you're going to come down to where it shows add-ins, and then it says Manage Excel add-ins down here. You're simply going to select Go. And then you want to be sure that you have your solver add-in added on here. If it shows with a check mark there, you're good to go. You'll see it up here under the Data tab. If I go to the Data tab, then over the far right, you'll see solver on here. That's what we'll use here after we get this problem set up. Now, the problem I'm working on or going to show is the solved example problem that's on page 326 of your textbook. This is almost identical to what your first problem is like for your homework problems for chapter 9. So this will really help you understand how to do that. But I thought for one of these, I would just do a little bit of a recording here so you could follow along. Now, what you'll see on my spreadsheet here is I've just put inserted a little note up here just to help us understand what we're wanting to do here. So when I read through this product mix problem, it tells me that what my goal is I want to maximize the amount of profit, and by finding the proper mix between the number of boys' bikes to make and the number of girls' bikes to make. So what I know that's what it's going to do. So I'm going to have two variables here. The two things that I've got to find out is, and this is a key to these problems, is determining what you need to find out. And the two variables here are one, number of boys' bikes, two, number of girls' bikes. How many of each of those did I make? So that's what solver is going to do for us. So before we get there, though, what I do is I start over here and I literally just take my problem and I type in, enter on here everything I can find out on this. So when I look at my book and my problem here, it tells me what my profit is on a boy's bike of $30, $50. Just reading through here, it tells me the minimum number of boys and girls is 250 each. It takes 4 hours in fab for a boy's bike, 4 hours in fab for a girl's bike, 1 hour in assembly for a boy's, 2 hours in assembly for a girl's. It tells me I have 200 fab employees, 100 assembly employees. I work an 8-hour shift with 3 shifts. So what this means is the maximum hours that I have available to me in fabrication would be my number of employees of 200 times my hours in a shift, which is 8, times my shifts in a day, which is 3. So 200 times 8 times 3 equals 4,800. Same thing in the max hours in assembly. Take my assembly employees as 100, daily shift is 800, number of shifts is 3, gives me a total of 2,400. Okay? Those are all known things. Those are all given to us. Everything else from now on, we don't know. And the key is it's going to be based on these variables. So what I've done then is I come in and I made a section here, which is where I'm going to find a solution and my changing cells. In other words, my changing cells are my variables. So I just highlight those in yellows. So I just put number of boys' bikes is going to be, and there's nothing in here. If I click in this cell, you'll see there's nothing there. My number of girls' bikes, I just highlight those in yellows to help me keep track of what it is. But here is one of my key cells that's in green. This is where my solution is going to go. This is where I'm going to maximize my profit. In other words, my objective here is to maximize my profits. So what's my profits going to be? It's going to be the number of boys' bikes I make times $30 profit. The number of girls' bikes I make times $50. Add those two together, and it comes in here. So I make a formula cell here in green. I'm going to click on this. So what you see now are my number of boys' bikes, which is F8, times B8, my profits of boys. My number of girls' bikes, which is F9, times my girls' profit of B9, or $50. I add those two together, and that gives me my solution cell. Notice it's empty yet because we have no idea what it's going to be. Now over here, I've got my maximum fabrication hours. So what I know is this, is I'm just going to do a calculation here to keep track of how many total fabrication hours I have. So what I'm going to do is when we get these numbers going in here, I'll take my number of boys' bikes times my fab hours, add to it my number of girls' bikes times my girls' fab hours. I'll do the same thing for my assembly. So I put a formula in here, my fab hours. So I take F8, which is my number of boys' bikes, times my number of fab hours for boys, which is B12. Add to that my number of girls' bikes, which is F9, times my hours in girls' fab of B13. I do the same thing in assembly. So I've got assembly, I've got F8 times B14, I've got plus F9, girls' bikes, times B15, girls' assembly. Now, here is going to be, I just did an equal sign here, so my changing cell will populate the minimum number of boys and the girls. This is just going to be here for our own information. We'll set this up in Solver. So I've got everything set up in here. I do this before, you don't worry about anything else. You just start listing everything possible you could take. Usually I do this on a piece of paper first. That's like in the problem, it'll say draw out, lay out a linear programming problem. That's really what you're doing. You're going to set your objective, you're going to determine your variables, and you're going to list your constraints. And when you get that done, you're ready to go to Solver. So to repeat, my left-hand section data was all given to me in the textbook. This is everything that's given to you in your problems. So yes, I have to do some calculations in here, but still the core is given to me. The solution and changing cells, your solution and your variable cells, are the number of boys' bikes, number of girls' bikes, my maximum profits. And here are my constraints that I'm going to use these in Solver here. So I know my maximum fab hours, my max assembly, so forth and so on. Okay? It'll make sense to you here. So now I'm going to click here where I want my solution cell to go, my max profit. I got that highlighted, and I go up here and I'll show you why I do that. I click on Solver, and this is what Solver looks at. So when I come in here to set objective, I'm going to click here, then I'm going to come back and click on the cell. See on that? So it says my set objective will be F10. That's going to be my maximized profits. What type of problem is it? I want to take it to the max. Now some of these may be minimum. Here will be my max. Next I'm going to click here by the changing variable cells. In other words, what cells change. Since I've got these highlighted over here, it's easy for me to tell where they are. I just come now and highlight and drag down over that area. So it shows now F8 to F9. Okay? Now I click on my constraints section. So again, I've got my objective, I've got my changing cells. Now it's going to be subject to what? So I'm going to add some constraints here. My first constraint is going to be the maximum number of fabrication hours. So this is where my calculations are done for that. So I click in I8, and that's got to be less than or equal, if you notice here in the middle, less than and equal to what? The maximum number of fabrication hours is 4,800. So I come back and I click over here in B20. So I've got one constraint. I'm going to add my second constraint. My cell reference now will be assembly. I'm just going down my line here. And that's going to be cell reference I9. My max girl hours is going to be less than or equal to what? My maximum hours in assembly are 2,400. So now I've got my max fab, my max assembly done. I click add. Now what I've got to do is get my minimum number of boys. So I click in this cell, which basically is identical to my boys' bike here. I could have just clicked here and done the same thing. But I'm just going to click here. Now this has got to be greater than, remember our constraint was I must have a minimum of 250 boys' bikes. So I'm going to select greater than or equal to, and I'm going to click over here, minimum number of boys. And then I add one more constraint, which is the minimum number of girls. Since I have these all laid out here, it's easy to follow, and this will be greater than or equal to. And again, I will click on the minimum number of girls, which is 250. And now I do OK. So when I look at my screen here, just to review before we go on, I've got my objective is going to go in the cell here. This always has to be a formula cell. It won't let you do it if it's not a formula. It's a maximize solution because I want to maximize my profits. I've got it by my changing cells or my variable cells, my two variable cells, which are my boys' bikes and my girls' bikes. I just highlighted those two. Subject to my constraints. So I'm showing here that my max fab hours of I10 must be greater than or equal to 4,800 B10 or right here, B20. My I9 must be less than or equal to, 2400. I-10 is the minimum number of boys must be greater than or equal to 250. You could also type in the right-hand side on here if you wanted to. I like to do this. It says make unconstrained variables non-negative, which simply means that you can't do a negative bikes. And now this is the solving solution. Notice this. Click that drop down. It's a simplex LP, which is a linear programming problem. Okay? So this is all set up to go. All I do now is click on the solve button here. And if I don't get a solution, it's going to tell me. And if I don't get a solution, it means I have something wrong here that doesn't make sense. But I'm going to just now click solve. And I get this, comes up here. And I'm going to pull this over here. You see on here it says solver found a solution. All constraints and optimality. So I say yes, I want to keep my solver solution. Notice over here on the right hand side of this, I have reports I can select. I'm going to select answer and sensitivity. It doesn't. It's just something here, and it'll make sense to you in a second on here. And because you notice on here now I've got sheet 1 where all my data is. Now all I'm going to do on this is simply do OK. And you'll notice on my tabs down here it's put in 2 new tabs. Notice here in my changing cells. Let me pull this across a little bit. Notice here in my changing cells. It tells me that I am supposed to, the solver put this in here, that the maximum profits will be made by making the minimum number of boys' bikes of 250 and the maximum number of girls' bikes of 950. If I do this, I'm going to make $55,000 profit. Down here in the bottom are 2 other tabs. My answer report, which basically just shows me what's on here. It's just an illustration of this. Don't worry about this too much. They just put this in here automatically for you if you highlight the reports. And this just shows more information on here, what the constraints were back and forth. And so I wouldn't worry much about this. So coming back here to my sheet 1, and I'm just going to rename this to data, just so I know it's easy to keep track of. This is how I do it. This is a real simplified version of your first problem on here of how to do Excel solver. The key of this, again, is before you ever open up the solver, is getting this laid out in Excel correctly. So I encourage you to take this and use this as a model, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. So let me know if you have any questions. I'll be happy to help you out with that more. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.